Welcome to the Digital Brand Builder Podcast, where we bring you the best growth strategies from the world's experts to help build your business fast. And now, here's your host, Mark Fidelman.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Digital Brand Builder Podcast. Today, joining me is Roger Nairn, and we're going to talk about how to use podcasts like this one to drive sales, to drive revenue, branding, whatever your purpose is. We're going to talk to Roger about how you use a podcast to do that. So I'm super excited. I'm hoping to learn something. I'm sure I'm going to learn something. But before we jump in, I want to turn it over to Roger real quick to give us a little bit of a background about himself.
Hey, Mark. Thanks so much for having me on the show. So my name is Roger Nairn. I'm the CEO of Jar Audio. Jar Audio is a podcast production agency. We work exclusively, though, with brands. So we help brands get into the podcast world and create their own original podcasts. So we help grow revenue and impact through ROI-driven podcasts that make meaningful connections with the brand's listeners.
Okay. Who cares about podcasts? Why is this important to brands?
You know what? Brands care about engagement with their audiences, and podcasts are fast becoming, one of the best ways to engage with audiences. Obviously, the medium itself has been around for about 8-10 years. A little bit longer than that, but as far as the popularity goes, what we're finding and what brands are finding is that podcast audiences themselves are quite unique. They're expanding and growing, but a podcast audience is highly educated, a little bit more affluent, really interested in educating themselves, digging deep into subject matter. And so if a brand can find the sweet spot and create a really fantastic value-driven podcast, then they're able to engage with their audience for a lot longer. And you being a marketer, me coming from a marketing background, brands very rarely have a problem, getting an audience's attention, through programmatic and able to target through, all sorts of the new amazing digital tools we have today. That's never really been the problem. The problem is keeping that audience's attention. And what we're finding is that if a brand can produce a great podcast, then they can actually hold their audience in the funnel longer. And really what it's doing is it's plugging the leaky funnel by increasing retention. Our podcasts, for example, get upwards of a 95 to 98% retention rate throughout the entire episode. That's a 20 to 30 minute episode. Now, I can't think of any other medium right now that's able to hold somebody's attention for that long. And then, there's all the other reasons like the cost of production and all that sort of stuff. But it's a fun time right now, and brands are wanting to get into the game. So we're able to offer the full service to help them do so. Okay,
so you bring up podcasting as one way to hold retention. How does that compare to like video?
Yeah. So the data that we've been able to pull says that when it comes to like a brand message in a video, typical YouTube video, let's say it's about a minute long, only gets about a 50% retention rate. And then, when you think about the ROI on that, the expense of producing video, it's not as great of a return as something like a podcast that's able to retain listen lengths for, in our case, upwards of 95, 98%. And quite honestly, most are able to get upwards of 85, 90%. So this is not just, the case of ours, it's the case across the industry wide. A lot of it has to do with the fact that podcasts cover topics that the listener is wanting to dig deep into. It's also such an intimate medium. Like it's literally like whispering into your ear. You sit down, you put on your earphones, you spend some time by yourself for walking the dog or washing the dishes or whatever you're doing. And so there's this element of just you and the voice, and you just get swept away, and that really helps to increase listen lengths as well.
Okay, but the other thing that you didn't mention that I'll mention, because I do both video and podcast, is the cost. The cost is a lot different, and the production value, it's got to be a lot higher, except for sound. I mean, sound's really critical on podcasts.
Absolutely.
and sound is critical on video as well, but there's so many other things you have to deal with, like lighting and location and background. I mean, there's so many different things that you have
and not to get into the weeds too much, but as you know, if you want to change something in a video, if you want to edit something down the road, it's not easy to go back in and recreate that, that sort of scene and that environment and the lighting and all those sorts of things. It's a lot easier to go in and tweak some audio. There's some editing that still needs to be done. It's not, something that you flick a switch on, but it's such a more flexible medium to be able to tweak down the road.
Yeah, agreed. So let's move into how you turn your podcast into either a lead generation or branding opportunity. I know it's plugging, and I agree, it plugs up the holes in the funnel itself. Mm-hmm. But I'd also like to start from the top of the funnel and just say, okay, how do people use podcasts for top of funnel type content to start people becoming aware of your brand, your product, or that that individual even exists?
Yeah, totally. So obviously everything we do is thought of through the lens of a marketing medium, but at the end of the day, nobody's going to listen to a 20, 30-minute ad. So off the top, let's just cover that there's very, very little mention of the brand in the podcast itself. What we do, when we sit down with our clients, is we start completely focused on who the listener is. So we do all the research to understand who this person is. What are they listening to? What do they care about? What are the things that they need to be either taught, or how can they be helped or entertained? And then we really dig deep into how the brand can serve that. So one of the questions we always ask our clients is, what does the world need most that you're most qualified to talk about? And then let's focus on that. And so we sit down with our clients and we say, this is the audience that we want to either reach or move or have act, make a purchase, all the different, things that we're looking to accomplish. And we craft the podcast to make as big of an impact on them as possible. And the only way to really do that is to just deliver as much value as possible. So, and then the KPIs bit, obviously important, but it all flows out from what sort of a show we're producing and what we're able to deliver for that podcast to that audience. So if you're a brand like Expedia, who's a client of ours, they came to us and they said, we have a bit of a brand challenge, and that brand challenge is our customers don't see us as enough of a helpful brand. And we want to be able to turn the dial up on our helpfulness metrics. Can you help us with that? And so we created a podcast with them that is all about helping the audience hack the travel world. There's no better brand who's capable of helping people navigate the online travel space than Expedia. And so we created a show called Out Travel the System. It's a podcast that is geared towards, helping you make the most out of online travel, either purchases or research, or just helping you understand how best to travel. And so we create this show. It has very, very little mention of Expedia. Every once in a while they'll bring on an Expedia member of the Expedia team, because quite honestly, some of their data scientists and some of their experts are world renowned, and they are literally the best in the world at what they do. So we created this show all about how to, navigate the travel world and then, push it out to their audience. We have a full sort of 6-point marketing plan that we put together for all of our clients to do so, which I can get into the details of. But the show is pushed out, and they have all sorts of different engagement tactics that they take to nurture that audience, increase that listenership, and watch it grow.
Well, before we jump into that, I would like to jump into the 6-point plan, but how do you decide on a focus for a brand? Because like you said, you don't want to talk about yourself in a podcast. It's going to get boring. There's only so much you could say. And I think you can introduce aspects of your brand throughout all the different podcasts where it doesn't seem too salesy. So my question always is, okay, we have a brand, and I do a lot of videos with these brands. What is it that on the podcast side should that brand do, and how do you decide I guess the question is, how do you decide on what the topic should be for the brand?
Yeah, again, it all goes back to the audience, actually. So it's really understanding what does the audience need, and then kind of turning around and asking couple questions. One is, let's look at the brand values. What does the brand represent? And then what can the brand offer in the form of either skills or characteristics? I mean, at the end of the day, it has to be entertaining as well. So are there certain elements of the brand that have, a humor aspect to it or a dramatic aspect to it? And let's lean into that. And really what it is at the end of the day is we find that intersection between who your audience is, what they need, and then what your brand represents and has to offer. And in the middle of that intersection is at least a kernel or an opportunity for some concepts around the show. And then what we do is we actually produce personas, or we'll produce a persona for who our typical audience member is, and we'll use that persona to scrub up against all the concepts that we come up for potential show ideas, as well as when we get into the production, when we make decisions like who the host is going to be, what the sound is like, what sort of music are we going to choose. We're again rubbing it up against the persona and understanding and asking ourselves, would this person listen to the show? Is this helpful for this individual? Are we offering enough value to them? Because at the end of the day, very little, we're gaining very little from a brand perspective, unless it's, we're gaining very little if we're just having listeners listen to one episode and walk away. We want them to listen to an episode. We want them to subscribe. We want to create a relationship with them so we can, get them into that funnel and nurture them along. So as much as we can understand about how to continue delivering value and continuing to deliver value, is going to be beneficial for everything, really.
Yeah, I mean, very well said with that. And I always like to throw out an example. Let's say you've got a pet CBD brand. It's not THC; it's CBD. Mm-hmm. So, if you were going to start a podcast, and I am putting you on the spot, so I don't expect the perfect solution because I know how long these things can take, but even a pet brand, I bet you could come up with some kind of a podcast because you'd be appealing to maybe an audience that have pets that are at the end of their life and they need some sort of CBD formula to help them through that aspect of it. But
yeah,
what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, so let's say you're that CBD brand, you're all about integrity in product and science and education. So those are some of the brand values, let's say, and then really understanding who your audience is. So obviously they're pet owners, they're loving and caring of their pet. This is like a child to them, and they're going through a difficult time because their pet is nearing end of life. So we'll create a persona around that. Let's say it's, his name is Kevin and he lives in San Diego and he's got an older German Shepherd and has tried pretty much everything when it comes to pet products and is also willing to spend almost anything for his pet because again, this is like his child. Well, let's scrub up some of those brand values with this persona, and come up with, some ideas. So maybe there's a show called Canine Care, all about alternative ways for afterlife or palliative care for your animals as you get closer to end of life, and then create a show around that. So everything around that show could be about alternative ways of caring for your pet. We could have multiple different guests, multiple different voices, and this is again where we get into the production side and we make those decisions like, what type of a show are we producing? Are we producing sort of a one-on-one interview like we're doing right now? Or are we maybe addressing it from like a panel standpoint? Maybe an idea is every show has 2 different experts on, one from more of a traditional medicine side and one from a more alternative medicine side. And they're not there to argue, but they're there to just explain their side of the scenario or their point of view. And then we have our host kind of moderating between the two and leaving it to the audience to decide on what makes the most sense for them. Or maybe we're looking at a more of a documentary style production where we're coming into someone's house and spending time with their pet and really kind of learning more about who the pet is and what sort of a relationship that they have together, and kind of weaving that throughout the story. And again, this goes back to my original point about the engagement levels of podcasts is incorporating tools like that. We call it sort of audio texture, whereby you're shifting the conversation into different areas and you're going down different sort of roads and avenues. Those are all ways of keeping the listener engaged and actually keeping the brain fresh and listening longer. And again, this is a marketing tool, so the longer we can have people engaged, the better. So we're making decisions like that. Again, going back to our persona, what is Kevin going to be interested in listening to? What are some of the other podcasts that Kevin listens to, and what sort of storytelling tactics do they take? Let's incorporate that in the show. And so it's really fun. It gets really fun because we get to completely blue sky, what the opportunities are in the show and try to make it as listenable as possible.
Well, I have to say it. Everyone listening, Roger and I did not plan that. That was him coming up with that off the cuff, and I actually think it's a pretty good idea for a podcast. So
thank you.
Yeah,
it's my advertising days where I was put on the spot by many clients who are like, we need an idea now, right?
Happens all the time.
Totally.
And they expect you to have the right answer right then and there, which is
yeah, and they're paying for it.
They're paid for it, exactly. So you mentioned a 6-point plan, and I'd like for you to quickly kind of go through each of those if you can, and just to give people an idea of what you do. So in the event they want to do it themselves, or if they want to work with you or whatever, they have a better understanding of what it takes.
Yeah, absolutely. So I think the first thing to remember when it comes to audience growth and marketing of your podcast is you need to think almost like a publicist or like you're your Netflix or your Universal, and you're pushing out your newest production. You need to look at it from multiple angles versus just putting some Facebook ads online, things like that. So we look at it from six buckets. The first bucket is what we kind of call marketing, and that's where we're looking for opportunities through different channels to promote the show. Let's say, for example, we're talking about our CBD podcast for pets. Let's reach out to BuzzFeed and let's pitch them on why our show should be included in a list of the top 10 podcasts for pet lovers. Things like that. These are all opportunities that you can reach out to different channels of media to pitch them on why they should feature you in their channels. The second area is PR and sort of earned media opportunities, and this is where we create a PR pitch kit for our shows, and we're creating a media list. We start very wide with our media. We look for kind of national opportunities: New York Times, Chicago Tribune, the California market, things like that. And then we're reaching out and pitching why our show should be featured. And then we're getting a little bit more niche. So if we're talking pets, then we're reaching out to the pet media market, and we're pitching on why our podcast should be featured in those opportunities. And then we're getting even more niche, and we're getting into the more kind of media, the media who's covering things like podcasting and the podcast industry, and pitching them on why there's great opportunity to have our either our host on for an interview or feature our show in total. And then we're even getting into specific podcast media, which you can pitch as well. The third area is what we call spotlighting. Now, there's a big misconception in podcasting that when you're featured at the top of Apple Podcasts, for example, in the new and notable section, which is sort of the holy grail, as you know, of getting the word out on your podcast, a lot of people think that that's you're beating some sort of algorithm. The reality is that those are all editorial decisions. There are real people in the Apple offices who work for Apple Podcasts who are making those decisions, which means that you can pitch them, you can reach out to them, you can tell them why you think you deserve to be featured, whether it's a new show that you're really excited about, or maybe there's a opportunity and there's some seasonality behind it. If you have a show that has a great episode that is Christmas themed or something, why don't you pitch them on why your episode should be included in a list of great Christmas episodes, things like that. The fourth area is what we call cross promotion. And again, going back to our persona of Kevin, we're asking ourselves, what are the other shows that Kevin's listening to? Because to us, other podcasts are sort of the low-hanging fruit of opportunities, because those are other podcast listeners, or those are the other podcasts that our fan base is listening to. So we're creating a big long list, and we're just doing the legwork to reach out to all those podcasts and discuss opportunities with them. And as you know, the podcast world right now is a bit of the Wild West, and there is a ton of opportunity and really no rules when it comes to these sorts of deals and working together. So we're pitching on why our host should come on their show in exchange for maybe their host coming on our show. Or in some cases, we're even swapping content. We're saying, hey, we're going to give you one of our episodes to include in your feed as a bonus episode to your listeners. And in exchange, we'll do the same thing on our feed. We're going to include one of your episodes as a bonus episode in our feed. And so you can play all those sorts of games together. And it's really fun. And the community is quite open to those sorts of things. And then the fifth area is paid. So paid opportunities. Now, we're not a big fan of paid social for promoting podcasts. It's not to say that we don't do it. We just find it doesn't work as well as buying ads on either other podcasts or on podcast directories. And again, it goes back to what I talked about with cross promotion. Is that's where listeners are already. So
where's the podcast directory? Sorry to interrupt. But where are the podcast directories before you move on?
Yeah, so podcast directories, great example is like Castbox is a great podcast directory. There's opportunities to buy either push notification or display ads. Stitcher does advertising as well. So much like other directories for other products, podcast apps themselves have advertising included in them. Overcast is another example. There's about 15 of them in total that you can reach out to and have discussions about demographics and what the best way is to get your podcast in front of those audiences. And included in that opportunity is advertising within podcasts. So there's sort of two ways of doing that. One is the sort of what I would call the baked in way of podcast advertising. And that's where you're literally handing a script over to the host of one of those shows and they're reading it. And therefore your ad is baked into the show. It's not going anywhere. And then there's the dynamic advertising opportunities. That's where you're dynamically inserting your ad into a donut, either in the beginning, the middle, or the end of the show. And the great thing about that is you're able to target specifically. You're able to produce and push out multiple versions of your ads, and they're able to target specific to demographics and geography and stuff like that. And relatively inexpensive compared to others. And then the final kind of bucket that we use is, and we really need a better name for this, but we just kind of call it the more bucket. And really what this is we ask our clients, what's the unfair advantage you have compared to either your competitors or other verticals, and then let's take advantage of those and promote the show. So if you're a bank, you're sending out monthly statements either through email or through the letter mail. Let's promote the show with a little line, included in that about checking out the new podcast on those statements. Or if you're a nonprofit organization, you've got a massive list of volunteers that are just aching to be engaged with the organization. So, promote the show to them. We always talk about starting with those closest to the brand first, and then promoting outwards from there, because they're going to be your evangelists. They're going to pass on the show to others. They're going to listen, help subscribe. They're going to listen. They're going to subscribe. They're going to leave you reviews. They're going to be excited to push the show for you. So you get that, that you get that organic, that you get that organic push. And so those are the 6 buckets. Now, each of our clients asks us the same question every time, which is, do we need to do all 6? And the answer is no. It really depends on what you're looking to accomplish, and what's right for the brand, and what's going to make the most sense for the show.
Yeah, I love all those things. I want to insert my own ad into those 6. We just had an episode on a 4-minute podcast hack, which was similar to what you said about inserting your podcast ad within another podcast. And that episode you could see in our list. I think it's the one previous to this.
It's a great episode. It's great.
Yeah, so you'll appreciate that if you're listening in on this. Okay, so love everything we've talked about. I have learned a lot. I'm curious as to what tools you use to kind of measure the efficacy of your client's podcast. What do you tell them to get?
So first you need an online host server of some sort to host your file and push it out to all the different podcast directories. Now, there's a whole number of them. Libsyn is one, Buzzsprout is another, Simplecast. We happen to use a program called Omni Studio. Fantastic program. Companies based out of New Zealand, beautiful people to work with, and essentially it's our home for hosting our file, as well as the title of the show, all the metadata, including show notes, and then we're able to connect to all the different podcast directories and push it out. And when you do that, it then allows you to pull in all the data. And that's really one of the most exciting parts about podcasting, is the amount of data you're able to gather. So with all of our shows, and this will be pretty much the same with most of the services that you're going to use. You're able to pull in all the analytics, so things like downloads, the reach, number of subscribers. You're going to be able to get into the age and sex and geography of your listeners. You'll be able to tell what devices they're using, whether they're listening on mobile or desktop or on their smartwatch or on their smart speaker. It's amazing how granular you can get, and that's on a show basis and even on an episode to episode basis. And then you also have your consumption data, and that's where you're able to tell how long listeners are listening to an episode for, where are they dropping off, where are they skipping, where are they getting bored, really, where are they becoming uninterested. And if you have a show that has sort of a consistent format and you're seeing a consistent drop off at a certain point, you need to ask yourself what's going on during that part of the episode, and is there improvements that we could be making. And that's really what this data is for, is for improving your show. It's for taking in and understanding what can we be doing differently, better. Again, focused on the listener, focused on value. How can we make a better show so that it's as listenable and shareable as possible? And so all this data is available to you. Now, I will say that when it comes to podcasting, the access to data is probably the one bit that is still very much a work in progress. I'll give you a perfect example is every directory and interestingly, when you listen to a podcast on your phone, like I use an app called Overcast, for example. Overcast is actually just pulling in the data from Apple Podcasts. So actually, when you connect your show to these directories, as long as you can connect to Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Google, Amazon, Stitcher, and let's say Radio Publica, you're pretty much getting into about 90% of all the apps and opportunities out there, which is great. The challenge with that, though, is Apple doesn't release the same amount of data as Stitcher does. A perfect example of that is Stitcher will tell you what age and sex the listeners were that listened to your podcast, but Apple won't. Apple will tell you different, a little bit of different data that maybe Spotify won't. And so you have to kind of make some educated guesses when it comes to, some of this information. And it hasn't gotten to a point yet where it's all uniform and cookie cutter. There has been the introduction of IAB into measurement, and they're starting to certify, and so a lot of these directories and services are falling in line with how IAB certifies and assesses whether something is a download or listen and things like that. But it's still a work in progress. That being said, it's fantastic information, and you're able to use it and gain a lot of value from it. But it's not quite there yet.
Yeah, I mean, it's come a long way from when I first started podcasting. I wasn't familiar with some of the tools you brought up, so I'm going to check them out because I think it is critical to find out, especially in a format like mine where it is very similar each and every time, to find out where the drop-off was or is, and whether it's everyone hates me as a host or it's a format where they're like, okay, I don't care about your last two questions that you ask guests. I personally, I think they do, but until I get the data, I really don't know.
Or maybe if you have advertising in the middle of your show, but you notice that people are skipping through it, you need to ask yourself: are my listeners either pissed off that I have ads now, or are they not the type of ads that are resonating with them? Because the data actually shows there's great study that BBC came out with called BBC Audio Activated that said that podcast listeners, 95% of podcast listeners don't mind hearing advertising and actually have more affinity for brands that advertise on podcasts, which is unheard of in the advertising world. A lot of it comes down to the types of products, but also the way that the ads are produced. A lot of them come from the show themselves. They're sort of baked into the characteristics of the show, and are less sort of broadcasty and more tailored to the audience themselves.
Yeah, I'm curious as to. Before we go to our final two questions, I'm curious as to if you've done the research on whether a host advertisement within their podcast is more effective than just not randomly, but putting a branded commercial within a podcast.
Yeah, so the data shows, and I don't have the exact number, but the data shows that a host-read ad is more effective because it feels like it's more natural throughout the show itself, and therefore it's actually more expensive than the sort of dynamically inserted ads.
Okay, well that helps me because I've been thinking about, okay, now I'm ready to expand this. How do I expand it? And that was one of the ways I was thinking about doing it. And you brought up some others earlier on today, so this has been very valuable. With that, let's segue to our final two questions. One, and I think I know what you're going to say, but what is the hottest digital marketing technology that you recommend people use today?
Well, I mean, definitely podcasting. But drilling down a little bit further, I think there's a lot of really great engagement opportunities in podcasts when it comes to streaming. Now, traditionally podcasts were downloaded directly to your phone. But now that we're seeing more streaming services like Spotify, for example, there's a lot more opportunities for brands to communicate in a number of different ways to listeners throughout the show. And I'll give you a perfect example. Spotify is actually testing this out, but I see no reason why they won't just roll it out. They're going to do a polling service so that when you're listening to an episode, let's say we're talking right now and there's an opportunity in the episode to say, hey guys, why don't you leave us your answer to this poll? And the poll is, what do you think is going to be the future of, future podcasting? And just, look down at your phone, or maybe your phone will vibrate and a little poll will pop up, and the listener right then and there can respond with their answer. Maybe it's a multiple choice, or maybe it's an open answer, but it gives an opportunity for them to feel like they're either adding to the show, and then the host can take that data and report on it in the next episode, or use it in a number of different ways. I think all these things are amazing, and they only help to enhance the experience. I can imagine all sorts of different storytelling opportunities, whether it's kind of like a choose your own adventure style way of podcasting, where you're given a choice to go down sort of one direction in the story or another direction, and you're able to choose that on your phone and kind of just skip to the next the next section depending on what your choice is. All these sorts of things are really cool. Now, a lot of the more traditional podcasting folks don't like this, because they feel like it's slipping further and further away from sort of traditional podcasts. It's kind of like people that don't like video and podcasts, which there are those that are out there that feel like it's always got to be just purely audio and stuff like that. But I'm a big believer that as long as it continues to deliver value and there's a reason behind it, and it's just going to enhance the experience, and it's all great.
Great answer. I am one of those that don't do podcasting and video at the same time. And it's only because I'm a purist on the video side. It's not because I have anything against everyone else doing it. I just look at, okay, I've shot those, and the engagement, the amount of time people spend watching it, very low compared to the other videos I put out there. Mm-hmm. So I'm just like, okay, I could just record it and add some extra production value to it, and with B-roll and other things. For me, it just hasn't worked out. I'm sure there's a way. I'm sure somebody's done it.
Yeah, and I'm the same way. And I always ask myself, like, why do people want to listen? Why do people want to watch a Zoom call, essentially?
Yes.
And I have no problem with video and podcasting, but again, is there a way to enhance it, or do it live, like through LinkedIn, and have engagement opportunities right then and there, while you're listening, and respond to people, asking questions and stuff. And so I always coach our clients who say, should we do video? First of all, I always ask is why, and what can we do to make it different, whether it's, overlaying it with some really cool animation, or, cartoons, or whatever makes sense for the brand. But to just show a Zoom call is, I don't know, not a fan.
Yeah, I mean, you can do frames around. If we do a podcast and they want video, we start with the video and then we turn it into a podcast. And in the video, we have B-roll. We put a little frame around the two people talking, or if it's three, we put a frame around all three. So we start with video, then go podcast, not the other way around. But we don't have a monopoly on what's right, what's wrong for your brand. Okay, let's go to question number 2. I was surprised at your answer. However, I really respect the man. So who is the most influential person in marketing today, and why?
I'm a big fan of Scott Galloway. Now, for those that don't know, Scott Galloway is a professor of marketing at the New York University Stern School of Business. He's also an author, a speaker. He has a couple podcasts. One of them is called Pivot, that he does with Kara Swisher. The other one is called The Prof G Show. He's also got a show on Vice, and he's got online courses, and he seems to be interviewed on all the major networks. I know CNN's a big fan of his. The reason that I think he's so influential these days is he keeps focusing on the importance of brand strategy, and he believes that you can derive value with brand strategy and communicate value through your brand. And maybe it's just the timing of when he became popular. But I think with everything that's gone on this year with COVID, obviously all brands are having to reassess who they are and what they represent as a brand, and how they engage with their audiences, and what sort of value they put into the world. It's so easy for brands to fall immediately to all sorts of tactics, programmatic buying and all these sorts of things, that none of it's wrong. But I feel like so many of them are forgetting the basics of just good brand strategy. And so he has this knack of going back to the simple and talking about, what that brand represents and what sort of value it's delivering in the world, and what brands are and what brands represent and how brands sort of navigate throughout the world, whether it's the business world or politics or education. And to me, it's just been a really refreshing sort of reminder of how everything has to come out of good strategy. Because if it doesn't, then you're just sort of throwing darts in the dark and really kind of forgetting what's important to your audience and delivering all that value to them.
Yeah, there's two other things that everyone should know about Scott Galloway. One, he wrote a great book, one of my favorite books, called The Four Horsemen. I believe was the title of it. And also, he's got an amazing video series on YouTube that he shut down. I have no idea why.
I can tell you why.
Tell me why.
Because he got a show on Vice, and I think they took all the video down because they wanted people to. He was essentially recreating the videos on Vice.
Okay.
Yeah.
But I mean, his episodes were, and he's not, he's got no inflection in his voice, but he's got this unique sense of humor that shines through. Comes across as this erudite professor, and he's talking about complex subjects, and he makes them simple and he makes them funny. And then all the B-roll and the cartoons and all the animation really add to each of these videos, and they're shot in black and white. And I'm like, what the heck?
Yeah. And he's got a lot of heart. He's got a lot of heart.
He does. He's got a lot of heart, and it works. This bald, geeky-looking guy. He comes, he knows his stuff.
Yeah.
Anyway, I was just surprised to see Scott Galloway as your choice, but I understand it now. I do believe in branding. I think, especially in today's day and age, you got to have a strong brand, and once you do have a strong brand and you have a community behind you, you can do almost anything in that space. So, yeah, I'm in podcast, obviously, as we're talking about today. Podcast is one more way to add to that brand. So, Roger, I want to wrap things up. Had a fantastic discussion. I think everyone's learned a lot. I know I learned a lot. I would love to have you back maybe in 6 months to talk about something very specific to podcasting, which, we could talk about offline. But yeah, I mean, any closing thoughts before we wrap up?
No, I truly appreciated the opportunity to have the conversation. The one thing I will mention to everyone listening, we run a webinar, which you're all invited to. It's a bi-weekly webinar. If you go to jaraudio.com/webinar, you can sign up. We conduct this webinar for the marketing community and really any communication professionals. It's called 10 Reasons Why Your Brand Needs a Podcast Now. And we really dive deep into all the reasons behind why brands should be getting into podcasting. But then we also get into how to get started, really an expansion of the conversation today, do's and don'ts, opportunities, and really get into the nitty gritty of how the sausage gets made.
Wonderful. And we will add those to the show notes. So it's jaraudio.com/webinar.
Yes.
To see that. All right, Roger, thanks again. And I look forward to talking to you on another subject in about 6 months.
Thanks, Mark.